Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going over this beautiful wheel gun that you see in my hands and that you guys have seen throughout the intro. This is a Smith & Wesson Model 19 Classic, also known as the Combat Magnum. We'll get into that here in just a second. So the Model 19 is an iconic revolver in terms of revolver history and use in the US. So I'm going to give you a brief history, and there's dudes that know this way better than me. I do not pretend to be the revolver history aficionado, but basically throughout the earlier part of the 1900s up until post World War II time frame, most law enforcement officers were carrying a .38 Special revolver. Typically the Model 10, it was definitely the most popular. So the Model 10 is a K-frame revolver, and again, shoots .38 Special. A lot of law enforcement departments wanted the ability to fire a .357 Magnum cartridge, which definitely gives you more power for sure. It's not even close. And the problem with that is, at the time, a lot of those guns, particularly in the Smith & Wesson lineup, were N and L frame guns. And for those who don't know, N and L frame are larger frames than what we have here with the K frame. So a lot of officers really didn't want to carry that all day long, have that extra weight on them, just to be able to get more power, when in reality, of course, as we know, most law enforcement officers, 99.9% of the time, do not actually draw their firearms. So they were reluctant to go to the .357 Magnum options. Now, roll in our gun that we have here, at least the original one, the Combat Magnum. I believe that's what it was called at first, and then eventually designated the Model 19. This gun took the K-frame and kind of beefed up some points along the actual revolver and allowed it to fire and handle the added horsepower that you get with .357 Magnum. Now, I will tell you that if you go read the reports from guys who shot a lot back then, if they were putting a lot of .357 Magnum rounds through the original Model 19s, I'm talking, like 10, 20,000 rounds, they would start to see some issues with the pressure that .357 Magnum creates, and some of their guns would start to have some issues. Of course, being wheel guns are relatively easy to work on, but it is something to take note of. And with that, a lot of law enforcement officers and even departments would say to train with .38 Special and then carry .357 Magnum on duty. That is a subject for another day, but it was a very common thing for folks to say that. Now, with this current Model 19, I'm probably going to say this 10 times in the video, it's actually product improved in that regard. In some areas, some guys aren't going to like some things. However, one thing it is product improved in is the ability to handle a high volume of .357 Magnum rounds. We'll get into why that is here in just a second. But first, we'll let the dogs take a look at it and then get into the details. We're going to get into the details of this gun, and there are definitely some differences versus some of the older Smith & Wessons. We'll try to touch on them as we go. So we'll start out here towards the muzzle and kind of work our way back. The barrel itself is 4.25 inches long, and the barrel is definitely different than like the older Model 19s. We'll show you some examples of that here in just a second, but the big difference is that it's a two-piece barrel. So the outer sleeve that we have here, and that you guys can see with this deep blue finish, is actually made out of carbon steel, and then the actual barrel insert itself, which you guys see right there, if my camera will actually focus, is made out of stainless steel. And that does a few things for it. Number one, it increases the strength for sure. And then when we get back here towards the cylinder, it also gives you some advantages strength-wise. And it also allows the barrels to be basically made and put on the gun quicker, because before in the past they would actually screw the barrels in and they'd have to fit them to the actual frame, and it takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time. That of course is eliminated here with the new process, and it guarantees, virtually anyway, that you have a very straight barrel, which we have here. This barrel is rock straight, dead straight rather, as straight as can be. Moving on to the front sight itself, it does have the traditional serrations on there, and then it has that red insert that you guys should be able to see pretty darn well there. Compared to, like modern night vision, Trijicon, etc. sights, it's very rudimentary. However, I can tell you that system's been working for decades and it still works today. Of course, given that it's daylight. So we do have our square notch rear, which we'll get to. but with that bright red piece in there during the day, it absolutely draws your eye to it, and it is very easy to pick up, and no complaints about that at all for this type of revolver from this guy. Along the top, you'll see that we do have these serrations, these anti-glare serrations, so that way if you're out shooting in bright sunlight, you're not going to get any sort of glare shot back at you. I've never had that happen, but I know folks have said it does happen. One thing I'll tell you as well is that on the top, basically on the top of your frame and your barrel here, it has a matte finish, whereas on the rest of the gun, it has a nice blued finish, nice deep blued finish. Again, that's to prevent any sort of reflection or anything like that as you're looking down the sights. Another advantage of that tension two-piece barrel is that it allows the barrel shank there to be a lot thicker. And then Smith & Wesson also changed the yoke here dimensions where it kind of all meets up when the actual round is going from the cylinder through the barrel. And what they say is with those new yoke dimensions and that barrel shank, this actually has as much metal as the larger frames, the old end frames did in the past. So that certainly is a good thing. I know a lot of folks with the older Model 19s would sort of practice with 38 carry 357 Magnum. This gun can take 357 Magnum all day long, and you don't have to worry about any sort of erosion or anything like that. So that definitely is a good thing. We should also mention here on the left side of the barrel, we have, of course, Smith & Wesson. On the right side, 357 Combat Magnum, so definitely kind of a cool little touch there. In our crane here, we have a difference versus some of the other ones. So we have this little protector, rather, I should say, here where the actual cylinder and the crane lockup goes in. And one thing, I'm just going to pull out an old gun here, sort of as an example. This is an old Model 10. I have a bunch of Model 10s. And what they kind of used to look like was like this. It was exposed. So you'd come out here, pop it, and then what you'd see here is that we actually have a spring and a detent system up front. Let me zoom in here so you guys can kind of get a look at that. We have that spring and detent system right there, and that's what kind of pushes here on it and locks it all up and keeps it locked up in place up front. On the new Model 19, that is not the case at all. You can see here with this protected area, there's absolutely nothing in there and nothing is touching up front. Instead, we have our detent right there with the spring underneath it, and it contacts the crane, and that's how it locks up. I think it's a stronger lockup system. You guys can see there where it mates up. It's very well fit, and actually on the older ones really wasn't at all. Not this is a bad gun, this is a fantastic gun. I love this Model 10, but it's definitely sloppier for sure, and this new Model 19 is definitely just a tighter, better fit gun in that regard. The cylinder, of course, holds 6 rounds on this one. You guys can get a look in there. It does spin freely, as you would expect. There's no wobble or anything like that when you spin it, which is exactly what you want there on a revolver, of course. It does have chamfering on there, as well as the fluting, of course, in between to reduce the weight, but that chamfering is going to allow easier holstering. So that is kind of cool as well, but definitely a very nice cylinder overall. Locks up nice and solid. Even in double action mode, there's very little play. When you pull the hammer back, there's, again, very little to no play in there at all. Can't be mad about that. Another thing that they did, which is nice versus some of the older guns, is this piece here, which kind of comes down along the frame. It's built in, it's nicely machined, it's not kind of haphazardly done. I'll show you another one of my Model 10s here. Again, I have a lot of Model 10s, I love the guns, but what you guys can see here is where the actual cylinder comes out. Over time, this one has actually kind of eroded due to just, of course, the number of rounds being fired through it. And as you guys can see, it's got a little bit of play in there, and it caused that wear that you guys see there on the metal. Whereas on this one, it's not the case. It's all machined in there. There's no rubbing at all. It's just very, very well fit, as I mentioned earlier. Another note here that's sort of an homage to the classic line here is this cylinder release. It's the older style. This is the newer style that Smith & Wesson has on most of their newer revolvers. We'll get to that gun here in just a second, but it does have the older style, which certainly is cool. One thing I personally don't like, and I'm sure I'm not alone there, however, I'm sure there are also people who do like it, is that it does have this lock mechanism here. A lot of folks call it the Hillary hole. Insert your term for it below in the comment section for sure. What it does is it allows you to lock the hammer, effectively making the gun inoperable until you unlock it. It just takes a quarter turn with the key that comes with the gun. You do get 2 keys, I should say. So there's an element of added safety there. However, there's also the possibility of a mechanical failure. I'll tell you, I've been shooting revolvers a long time, not as long as some of you guys, but I've got many thousands of rounds through them. I've never seen a 357 Magnum ever have a problem with that lock. The only gun I've ever seen or heard have that problem was a 44 Magnum once ever that it moved. And that, of course, the type of recoil that you're getting there is just very different. That said, you know, again, some folks love it, some folks hate it. It kind of is what it is, and I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. Our rear sight, rather, like I mentioned earlier, has a square notch, and we also have, of course, the serrations on the back of it to prevent any sort of glare, and that is an adjustable sight. And so you guys can set it up and dial it in for where your revolver is shooting with your particular load. We have that screw over there to dial it in. And again, for the type of gun it is, it has a very nice sight picture. It's very clean, and there's just not a lot to complain about. On the hammer here, you guys can see we have a very nice checkered surface for guys who want to cock the hammer and fire it in single action. And again, sort of just to compare new versus old, again, we'll grab one of the Model 10s that we had out earlier. I think they're actually both like that. Yes, they are. So what you'll see here is that both of these hammers have the firing pin on there. I believe Smith & Wesson changed that right around 2000, 1999, somewhere in there. And the new guns simply haven't had it, and that's just for an added degree of safety. I tend to actually like that. So what you'll see here on this one is, if I can actually zoom in here, you guys should be able to see right there, we have our firing pin there, and it's a spring-loaded firing pin. And again, it just adds a degree of safety to the gun to help it prevent, or rather not fire, when you don't want it to there. So I do like that upgrade. Another thing I really like about this gun is the grips. They're walnut grips. It has good checkering in there. They look very classic. The fit of them is flawless. You guys can see just very nice up here along the edges, and nothing to complain about at all in terms of these grips aesthetically and just from a user standpoint. You know, some guys may like grips with fingers, stuff like that, but I like these. I have large hands, and this nice palm swell back here on the bottom. It looks like a square butt. I should mention that it actually is a round butt gun. So if you want to make a smaller, or rather add a smaller grip on there for, say, like concealed carry, I'm sure some guys would do it. If you want to, you have that option with the round butt. However, it does appear when you get it in as a square butt, but it's not. It just really fills the hand quite well. I'm sure some of you are wondering that blisters from a silencer. Don't touch them, kids, they're hot. But yeah, it really fills the hand well. And again, someone like me who has large hands, I wear extra large to double extra large gloves. A lot of times that can be a problem with revolvers. It is absolutely not the case with this one. And again, one thing that's nice about having it be a little bit wider back here as well is that when you're firing those 357 Magnum loads, full house loads, it just distributes the force along a greater surface area of your hand, and just helps perceived recoil be a little bit less than it would otherwise be. One thing that you certainly can't neglect on a double action, single action revolver like this is the trigger. So again, it is double action or single action. What that means for folks who don't know is that, we'll just double check real quick, we are clear, is that the trigger can both cock the hammer and drop the hammer. So you can pull it and it will do both actions, or if you want, it has the ability to fire single action. So for somebody who's really used to semi-auto type guns, that single action is as good as it gets, but the double action is a little bit stagey in my opinion. So I will kind of walk you through it real slow here. That's kind of right there. That's your first stage, and it's heavy. The double action pull on this, when I measure it, is right at about 11 to 12 pounds consistently across the board. And there's our second stage. You guys can hear it click again. At this point though, the actual brake back here is actually pretty nice. It's pretty clean. It's predictable. If you're trying to actually focus on it, you can get it to be pretty accurate, even firing like that. But letting it go there, just like so, it definitely has 3 distinct stages when you're firing it. However, that single action trigger, again, for somebody who's used to modern semi-autos, it's as good as it gets. It breaks right at 4 pounds on my scale consistently. There's no wall, there's no creep. You just press, break, clean. Again, look at that thing. Press, bang. I mean, in terms of accuracy and precision, single action revolver triggers are about as good as it gets. A lot of guys really like the 1911 triggers. Honestly, I'm going to tell you, this one's better than just about any 1911 trigger I've ever seen in single action. It's fantastic. I want to do some size comparisons here, but before we do that, I'm just going to get a quick weight. Of course, it is unloaded, and you guys can see there, we're coming in just under 2 pounds, a scotch under. So 1 pound, 15 ounces and a half-ish. So it is definitely not a lightweight gun at all. Again, size comparison-wise, we're just going to kind of chuck up the old Model 10s. You'll see it's very similar. That is not a coincidence, of course, because it shares the same frame size, but all in all, very similar in terms of size. However, this one here is 38 special only, for those that don't know, and that's what these guns were for a long time until, of course, the Model 19 came about, which is one of the reasons that it was really well known and really well thought of. However, what we have here is our Model 29. This, of course, chambered in 44 Magnum, and you guys can see the size difference there in terms of this frame size versus this frame size. There's a significant difference, and in the past, this is basically what you're looking at if you wanted a 357 Magnum revolvers in the old days. And then, you know, of course, the Combat Magnum came along and changed all that, and then now with the Model 19 Classic, it really is, in terms of being able to handle sustained fire of 357 Magnum rounds, it's a better option than the old ones. The old ones had some kind of cool things going on that are maybe better in some ways, but in terms of actually firing a high amount of 357 Magnum rounds, I would take the new one. I just kind of wanted to show off my beautiful Model 29 though, so you guys can see, but it also gives you an idea of the different frame sizes and just why this gun was so popular when it first came about, because basically guys were carrying something like this. Of course, this is a 6-inch barrel, but something this size and then going to something like this was a tremendous difference in terms of how it carries. And then, of course, just because I want to show the big boy off, this is the 500 Magnum. This one here, I believe, is 8 3/4-inch barrel. Obviously, and a totally different animal. You know, a lot of guys say the Model 19 is a big gun. Well, show them one of these, and then they'll know what a big gun is. I think we covered most of the details. One thing I want to talk about is the shooting experience. I'm going to roll in a couple of clips here. The first one's going to be me shooting this revolver with a 38 special loads rather, and then after that we're going to roll in some clips of me shooting a 357 Magnum. Now I will tell you, one thing that's nice about the weight that we showed you earlier is that the gun soaks up 357 Magnum pretty darn well, especially with these grips like we talked about earlier. However, there is a perceived recoil difference for sure when shooting the 357 Magnums. Of course, they are a much more powerful round. Now, one of the advantages of a gun like this being heavy and being able to shoot 38 specials is that for new shooters, it would be a gun that you could possibly introduce a new shooter with, because again, it's really, really light shooting with the 38 special rounds. And of course, 38 special is still a lot better than nothing should they choose to use that for defensive type use. But all in all, I really like the Model 19 Classic. I like the original as well. But this one here, while it does have some drawbacks, and I mentioned that earlier, I'm going to mention what they are here. It does have some MIM parts on the inside. A lot of guys don't like that, and I fully understand that. However, I think if they were to actually, make all this with the original type components, and include the stronger barrel lockup, the shank, all that stuff, you'd be looking at a gun that's probably $1,500 to $2,500, depending on how much labor costs at the time. And these are all made in Springfield, Massachusetts. We should point that out. So the addition there of some MIM parts helps keep the cost down. I think the MSRP on this is around $850. Looking around online, found it a couple places. It was at Brownells for like $7.99. And then over at Big Daddy Unlimited, it was under $700, which is a fantastic deal. It's the cheapest I could find anywhere. If you guys are looking to sign up, by the way, I will put a code down below in the video description, or rather a link, so you guys can sign up for a trial membership. I think they're 99 cents still for a month if you guys just want to try it out. But great price there. And I think at that price point, the value that you get with this gun is awesome. Again, some folks don't like the MIM parts, some folks don't like the Hillary hole. I don't really have a problem with it. Again, 357 Magnum, I've never heard of it or seen it be an issue. But all in all, just a very well-built gun. Shoots great. This particular one has over 1,200 rounds of 357 Magnum, if I could actually talk through it, and it shows no signs of unusual wear or anything like that. And I do believe that it's got many more thousand rounds to go before it needs any sort of servicing. And if I get there, I will report it to you. But all in all, really like like it. If you guys have any questions about this revolver, you can always post those down below in the comment section as always. You can also post over at my Facebook page. That's the best place to get in touch with me. If you actually need an answer to your question, I don't always see the comments on YouTube, Full30, elsewhere, but on Facebook I do see them when you send me a message or comments. So that's the best place to reach me should you actually need an answer. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for subscribing, and I hope to see all of you in the next video. Headshot. Got it. Again, 158 grain American Eagle. Jacketed soft points up first. All right. And again, those Swift frame, A-frames rather, 180 grainers up next.